Hello everyone, my name is Naguura and today I will tell you everything you need to know about Darkheart Thicket in Dragonflight Season 3. DHT was first introduced in Legion and is now being brought back into the current Mythic Plus dungeon rotation. There are 4 bosses in this key and it also is one of the shorter dungeons this season with a 30-minute timer. At the start of the dungeon you will encounter different kinds of beasts. The Nightclaws are the cats. They jump on a player at range and leave behind a bleed effect which can only be removed by healing the player past 90% health. The spiders are called poisoners, and their main ability is a poison debuff they apply to targets, taking nature damage and causing an AoE explosion around the player on expiration if not dispelled. The screechers are birds and they have to be interrupted on their screech cast. If not interrupted, it will do physical damage to a player and disorient them for 3 seconds. The Grizzlies cast Maddening Roar, which is an uninterruptible AoE magic damage cast. They also apply a debuff increasing subsequent damage from the same cast. The debuff can be outranged at more than 30 yards, while the damage of the ability itself is 60 yards range. They also spawn Abominations, which are tiny mobs that leave behind puddles and chase after players. You can quickly get overwhelmed by those 2 mechanics if you don't deal with the bears quickly. The last 2 important mobs to explain within this area are the Ruiners and the Razor Beaks. The Ruiners are casters and continuously cast Despair onto the tank and Star Shower, spawning dodgeable swirlies around them. Despair does magic damage to the tank and stacks up a magic debuff with healing reduction if not interrupted or dispelled. The Beaks cast an uninterruptible frontal charge towards the direction they are facing, so basically towards the tank. Initially, it seems like the last 2 Grizzlies have to be killed for the barrier to the first boss to disappear, but that's not true. You can skip the bears by just walking up to the barrier to start their roleplay. Of course, make sure to not body pull the Grizzlies on accident. First boss you face is Archdruid Gleidalis. He leaps at a target at range, applying a grievous wound effect similar to the cats you fought earlier. He also summons Abominations that fixate players and leave puddles on the ground, just like the Grizzly Bears. And lastly, he does a frontal attack and charge towards the tank. So melee have to watch out to not be in front of the boss, and the tank wants to make sure he doesn't charge too far. After this boss, you will see a lot of Balthorn Blossoms, Dryads, and Keepers. The Blossoms are the flowers, and they consistently get healed by the Keepers if they are close by. So you need to make sure to kill the Keepers first. The Keepers also spawn giant mushroom traps, dealing heavy amounts of damage if you trigger them. Watch out because the animation seems to be a bit smaller than the actual trigger radius. The Dryads are hunter-type mobs, which makes it difficult to move them around. They shoot random players and also apply a poison debuff to random players, reducing healing taken and dealing ticking nature damage. The last type of mob you have to deal with before the next boss are Nightmare Dwellers. They continuously channel Tormenting Eye onto players, dealing damage and fearing them if not interrupted before casts finish. You have to kill all the Dwellers for the boss to spawn. Darkheart is a giant tree and this boss is especially dangerous for the tank. Once in a while, the tank will be picked up in a crushing grip, dealing heavy nature damage to the tank until they are thrown at a location doing damage to everyone on impact. He also casts a frontal breath towards the tank, so be careful not to be in front of the boss. Other than that, he also casts Shattered Earth, doing AoE damage and knocking back players. He also spawns roots underneath each player's location, which then spawns saplings out of them if not removed. They can be removed by triggering the root and removing it with abilities like Shapeshifting or Blessing of Freedom. Once you finish Darkheart, you can move towards Dressaron. This trash area can be especially dangerous and has caused many groups to disband in the past, so watch out. Within this area, there are a lot of eggs. If a player comes close to the eggs, they will break and spawn whelplings out of them. The whelplings don't do much, but you can quickly get overwhelmed if you spawn too many. Watch out because the trigger range of the eggs is a lot bigger than it seems. The Blood-Tainted Furies, the big elementals, also cast a frontal charge towards the direction they are facing. If the charge hits any eggs, it will also spawn whelplings, so be careful. Additionally, they also spawn a big red sphere in the air, falling to the ground. If a player gets hit, they take damage and get knocked. Additionally, the elemental heals for anyone getting hit by either the charge or the sphere. The animation of the sphere is also incredibly difficult to see in the water, so be extra careful. Once the Furies die, they spawn 4 smaller elementals. These elementals are incredibly dangerous because they cast Blood Metamorphosis. If the cast is not interrupted, they will each turn into a Blood-Tainted Fury again, the big elemental they spawned out of. So if you aren't careful, you can end up with numerous elementals and they do not despawn if you reset them. If you manage to get past the hallway of death, then you are ready to deal with Dressaron. Dressaron's room is full of eggs as well, so make sure not to spawn whelplings on accident. Dressaron casts a frontal breath towards the tank, Downdraft and Earth-Shaking Roar. The Roar does AoE damage to everyone and spawns a puddle underneath one player, while Downdraft is a channel pushback that gets stronger the further you are from the boss. The hallway between Restaurant and the last boss also includes a lot of dangerous mobs requiring a lot of interrupts. Let's go through them all. The imps cast firebolts onto the tank and fury explosions at random players. Make sure you interrupt the explosions, otherwise it leaves behind a debuff on a player exploding for AoE damage on expiration. The summoners cast shadow bolts at random players that should be interrupted, and additionally they also cast a curse at players, leaving behind a dispellable debuff, dealing periodic damage to close by players of the target. Another dangerous mob is the Stalker. They jump behind random players dealing heavy shadow damage and it can't be interrupted. The bats leave a disease on a tank, dealing heavy nature damage and also healing the bats. So kiting these mobs is a good idea as long as the damage dealers don't gain aggro. The last pack in this hallway is very dangerous as it includes one of each type of mob we just went over, so it requires a lot of coordination. If you can somehow skip this pack, I recommend it, but it's a very narrow hallway and it's not easy to skip. The last boss of the dungeon is Shade of Xavius. His 3 main abilities are Growing Paranoia, Nightmare Bolt and Feed on the Weak. Growing Paranoia puts a debuff on a player, creating a growing puddle around them. If anyone comes close, the player will get feared, so make sure you stay away with this debuff. The Nightmare Bolt does initial damage on application and creates a circle around the affected player. If no other player stands within the circle, they will be silenced. And lastly, Feed on the Weak is a channeled heavy damage ability on a random player. At 50% HP, the boss casts a big AoE damage ability. After this cast, he will also spawn swirlies around the room, in addition to all his other abilities from phase 1. And that's it for Darkheart Thicket. I really hope this guide helped you out, and if it did, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. If you have any questions, make sure you comment below, and also you can go over to my stream at twitch.tv/Naguura and ask any questions there. Alright, thank you so much for watching and have a nice day. Bye!